Hi Ved, how have you been?
Hi, bro. Just like my brain isn't working.
Why, man?
Right? Like the brain is the most outstanding organ. Okay, it works 24/7. It's like 365 days a year. Like like from birth until you fall in love.
What?
Sorry, sir. I just tried to crack that joke. It's one of the first lines I found online when I googled love.
I guess you've been googling too much of love since last week.
Yeah, I just googled like funny sentences on love. Okay, and like this thing came up. Like I didn't even know if it was funny.
You know what your
I've read
joke
so many of them. Like my brain is numb to it.
exactly. You know what your joke reminded me of? Those typical
Oh.
WhatsApp forwards that you get on family groups, and where
Huh.
like some of your uncles or some of your aunts or sometimes even your
Yeah,
parents
yeah, yeah.
shared those messages, and then
Yeah.
those bursts of emoticons come, and yeah,
Hmm.
I don't really enjoy them. Let's say.
Yeah, but I don't know why we need to have these constructs that a family has to say good morning on WhatsApp every day, and like someone
Yes.
has to take the onus of good morning. There's so many constructs surrounding family and everything,
Yes, and also
and marriage.
this idea of how people should behave and how love should be expressed, either whether it's
Uh,
through sarcasm, humor, irony,
hmm,
or in more
hmm,
pernicious aspects of controlling how love should be expressed in public between people, how
yeah.
relationships are to be
Hmm,
formed. I think they are really, really
hmm.
problematic constructs, and maybe we can sort of go to some extent discussing those things in today's episode.
Yeah, yeah, bro. So we can totally talk about it. I'll tell you what. I think marriage is one of the things which has the most number of constructs surrounding it, right from the WhatsApp jokes and every MC and a Sangeet and a wedding talking about why the husband-wife jokes and why there are certain things which have to happen in a husband-wife relationship, right up to actual norms, right, where different societies, Japan and tribals in India and the US, everyone has their own ideas of how couples should behave. You know what people do on the tea gardens? So they don't
Correct.
marry, okay?
Mm-hmm.
They when they fall in love, they live in for a good 30, 40, 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only like a social need that you must be married, otherwise your child is illegitimate, right? So
Uh-huh.
they get married when they're 60, 65 sometimes, just so that their child is not called illegitimate and their child can marry if he or she has to
Okay.
before these people die.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, their lives are just living.
Yes.
And they don't mention partners or anything on paper. They live
Mm.
independent existences, right? They're unmarried or like they mention single wherever you ask them to.
And to sort of follow
So
up on
like,
that, what you just said
huh, huh,
about these tea laborers, this reminds
hmm,
me of the Muria tribe, the Muria tribe in Chhattisgarh. Now, this Muria
hmm,
tribe, what they do is they have a sort of setup which very loosely I
huh,
can call a sex house. Now, what does that mean?
hmm,
That means that you have the teenagers and the youngsters of the Muria tribe
hmm,
gathering every night in this particular house, this sort of
okay,
thatched roof kind of a place in the middle of the
hmm,
village where all of them come together, and that is where the females impart sex education to the
hmm,
males, the senior females to the more junior males. So let's say there would be a 19-year-old female
okay, okay,
teaching a
okay,
16-year-old or a 17-year-old male how to have intercourse, and there is no like emotional
hmm,
connection to this whatsoever. There is no emotional fallout, emotional baggage,
of course,
or
yeah,
anything of that
hmm,
sort. It's just practicing the art of
hmm,
sex so that when these boys grow up, they know how to do it
hmm,
safely. And I think that's such a beautiful concept. Like I was completely
oh,
blown
yeah,
away by it when I read
hmm,
about it in
hmm,
and I read about it in class 11, so quite some
yeah,
time ago.
hmm,
And I just don't
hmm,
understand why, as a larger society, in a more sort of urbanized society where we claim to be more modern, we
hmm,
don't have something
hmm.
similar, right? Because I think it's so
So
important.
that's a model we should replicate. Eric. That's a model we should replicate.
Hmm.
That is what we're talking about. Like it normalizes the idea of decoupling emotion and physical attraction.
Yes, because at the end of the day, you have to look at the idea of lust as a concept that is a bodily need. And there is no need to sort of morally shun it away and say that, okay, this only happens during sort of child
Or
rearing and
to just
conception.
give it a moral spin. Like you don't give it a moral spin. That's it.
Exactly. And
It's like
especially
eating.
at a time when we as a society are evolving to have much better
Yeah.
sexual health. Like we are not living in the 60s
Hmm.
anymore where syphilis or AIDS can be contracted at the drop
Yeah.
of a sperm, if I
Drop of
may
a
say,
hat.
instead of a drop
Yeah.
of a hat, maybe a drop of a sperm.
Uh,
That's not the case anymore,
uh,
and nor are there cases where we don't have adequate birth protection techniques. There are, it's just that people don't use it most of the time.
hmm. Hmm.
But I think this is fundamental, and this sort of reminds me again that how tabooed the concept of sex really becomes. Like I remember I was in class 7 when a teacher of mine in school uttered the word sex as part of a passage that was being read out. Okay, and there was some
Yeah.
person in the class, some student in one corner that started giggling.
Mm.
And this is where you're sort of in
Yeah.
that pre-puberty, or puberty has just hit you, and you start to
Mm.
hear about all these terms, and there is curiosity. So that
Yeah.
person started out laughing. Now the teacher became instantly ferocious and called out that person and humiliated them for laughing at the mention of sex. And what is worse is that
Mm.
the teacher went ahead and said sex only has one meaning, which is gender. Now, it's problematic on two levels. Firstly, sex does
That's
not mean
factually
gender.
incorrect.
Yeah, sex does not mean gender because the concept of
Huh.
gender is a social concept, whereas sex
Gender
is
is
a
a choice.
biological
Yeah, yeah.
concept. Yes.
Agree. Huh,
So
agree.
that is
Mm.
in and itself an error, but the more egregious error at that time, even to me, like I was 13, 14 at the time, was the fact there was this complete negation of accepting the fact that there is a concept called sex, which is intercourse. And even the way in biology classes we were taught, I was from an ICSE school, and even the word
Mm.
sex wasn't mentioned in a biology class. They would use terms like coitus
Mm.
and copulation and try and
Coitus. Yeah.
sort of give an academic tinge to
Reproduction.
the. Yeah, well, reproduction is of course
Yep.
the basic idea, but I'm saying the act of
No, no, no. So
reproduction.
that's the only entry point. That's the closest we get in the ICC, at least in our times, in the ICC syllabus. That's the
Hmm.
closest we got to discussing sex as a concept. Like, there's no sexual education. There's no sex education.
Yeah, none at all whatsoever, and it's appalling because I mean I remember the sex, well, not the sex ed classes, but the biology classes, which is supposed to be your entry point into
Mm.
sex education,
Mm.
completely going over my head because they would talk about these organs, and the only organs that I would sort of understand would be the male organs, but the female organs
Mm.
I would have no idea what they actually mean, what their function is,
Mm.
and the very labeling and the way you frame the discussion becomes so academic that you can't relate to it at a
Mm.
very basic fundamental level, and that's a huge problem, right? Because it
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
stigmatizes sex in supposedly progressive
Mm.
environments at a very early age.
Mm. Then maybe you have questions at that time, and maybe the inability of the academic curriculum to satisfy those questions creates far more problems.
Hmm.
Because it just again, it's a cognitive dissonance. It leaves you thinking that this has literally no relation with what I'm seeing or what I'm hearing in pop culture, like society around me.
Yeah.
Because the guy's coming through in his carpool, and he's like, his bus driver tells him something about sex. He has a cousin or an elder sibling or some neighbor somewhere. These are little real cases we know, right?
Yeah.
Who he learns about sex from, right?
Mm.
Yeah. So no one uses the word vagina when they're talking about sex in general life. Like,
Yes.
not the bus
Yes.
driver, not the cousin, and not the neighbor, right?
Hmm.
So their idea is far more relatable, far more appealing, and hence their ignorances also become, because they get a immediate opinion leadership vis-a-vis the book, like over and above the book.
Hmm.
He goes more to that side when he needs to satisfy his curiosities, right? And that's where, like,
And that's where all
ignorances get perpetuated.
exactly, and all the
Exactly.
problematic ideas about sex and sexuality and gender and
Yeah.
all these things also come into play.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you're learning from the wrong place, because the right place doesn't talk to you about it. It
Exactly.
knows, but it won't talk to you about it.
Yes. Yes, that's true. I mean, for example, how many of us have actually had a proper conversation about with our parents about sex? I highly doubt how many of us would have had that, right, in our generation. So, and that's a huge
Mm.
problem. That's a huge deficit because you are sort of ignoring this elephant in the room that is there, and it needs to be spoken about. Because at the end of the day, this is a part of being human. The sex drive, and even for
Mm.
that matter, procreation is very. It's
Mm.
what makes
Mm.
us survive, right? So I just
Yeah.
don't understand why there is such. I mean, I do understand what the reasons are, but I just don't think
Mm.
those reasons justify why we continue to live in this environment.
So I think that, that one takeaway from that polyamory concept
Hmm.
should be that when we start talking about it, a very definite result we want from that kind of discourse in society is that we should start seeing relationships or sex in the more natural, organic sense as things
Yeah.
that do exist, and just to break the taboo. Like, you don't know what you want out of it,
Hmm.
but you at least know that you want to break the taboo. And when
Absolutely.
just on the non-sex part, on the relationship idea, maybe we just want to realize that relationships, at the very essence, or love, as we began this, right,
Mm-hmm.
are supposed to be liberating.
Yes.
Bottom line.
Yes.
And it becomes toxic when you put in bit too many constructs in and around what the relationship should mean or what love should mean. So the minute you go back to realizing that, bro, it should be liberating, and if that means we need to discuss a new concept which appears to be far more free or far more freeing in its nature if followed, we should just discuss it. It'll come up with its nuances. Some you accept, some you reject, but it's gonna it might be more modern, but it's going to be more ancient in the way that it takes you back to the essence of a relationship, which is
Yeah.
making you transcend, which is not happening, right? Because of the crazy increase in toxic relationships.
Yes.
So maybe the conclusion is talk about it so that it can be liberating again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first step is to talk about, and I think just one more sort of
Mm.
point I will add to all this
Ah,
ignorance
ah,
about
ah,
sexual
ah, ah.
culture is the
Mm.
vast level or levels of ignorance that exist around menstruation and the idea of menstruation. Now,
Ah.
obviously, as a man, I have never had an experience of menstruation, but it took me a
Mm.
very long time to understand what the concept is at a fundamental level because nobody would speak about
Mm.
it. And even in like the school environment, whatever biology we were
Mm.
taught, there was very little
Mm.
engagement with menstruation,
Mm.
and the amount of pain and the amount of suffering that actually undergoes itself in the that the female
Mm.
undergoes during that
Mm.
time, right? And I think that's a
Mm.
huge problem because what you're doing is you're not engaging with an aspect of the opposite sex that defines so much of their regular daily mundane lives, because then you're not
Definitely. Yeah.
appreciating the kind of struggle and the kind of life that they're trying to lead. So it took me a
Mm.
very long time to actually understand this whole concept, and the moment I did, it suddenly, in a
Mm.
very subtle way somewhere in my mind, it changed my perception of what femininity and what womanhood means, because there is this
Mm.
whole concept of menstruation which men don't have.
Yeah.
So this is another major lacuna that does not get addressed whatsoever, and obviously it's
Mm.
part of the wider
Mm.
ignorance around sex ed.
The academic part of it teaches you nothing,
Yeah, nothing at all,
right?
absolutely.
And it yeah, and it causes a lot of problems in terms of people who aren't used to female interaction and are suddenly
Yes.
thrust into it. And
Yes.
I'm talking literally of a very typical student, like male student
Hmm.
who's come from a boys' school and who's been in a boys' course in college and
Hmm.
who's deprived of all female interaction, right?
Hmm.
And the minute he has his first female interaction, which God forbid is an arranged marriage, which in a lot of cases
Yeah.
it like
Hmm.
terribly is, if he has like a proper organically like attained like got reached female interaction,
Hmm.
the awkwardness is because he realizes there's so much about that being in front of me that I don't know, but I'm supposed to. So I think the
Yes.
worst
Yes.
part of that is that we've reached a level in society where we know that, oh, there's so much which should be talked about, but we
Hmm.
end up going to bed the same day where we think it should be talked about, realizing that it won't be talked about and doing literally nothing about it.
Hmm.
But I think the problem is you don't identify or like actively go and expose yourself to setups where you can talk about it
Hmm.
because we're so happy with it being a taboo because it's a safe space.
Hmm.
It's a safe space to not have these conversations, like, and that's dangerous, right? Because people don't realize you're exposing yourself to far more danger by not engaging in that kind of a conversation.
In terms of, I think, the whole idea that
Mm.
love, sex, and its
Mm.
concomitant concepts are
Mm.
fundamentally about how knowledge and ignorance tussle with each other is something that we need
Mm.
to get to grips with as a society. Because the moment I think you
Right.
start understanding your sexual needs as a person,
Mm.
completely
Mm.
demystifying all the different ideas that exist, and there can
Mm.
be very, very weird ideas. So just to give you
Mm.
a filter between myth and reality, sex can be very
Mm.
weird in the sense that and the myths around it and the realities around it can be very weird. So one myth which
Mm.
percolated for a long time in Western society and even like sort of went into the Orient and the East is that
Ah.
the idea that masturbation makes you blind. Okay. And it's
What?
something, yeah, that the idea that masturbation makes you blind is something that people believed for a very long
How?
time. How I don't know, but that was like a myth that was percolated,
Yeah.
and people started buying
Mm.
it, and this was done primarily because masturbation was seen as something that is morally reprehensible. Okay. And I think there was
No, oh
even,
my God, that is the biggest taboo. Though
oh
there are
yes, of
debates where
course.
people go
Like
and
there are people that might be listening to this right now and would suddenly get a twitch when I said the word masturbation, because they'll be like, oh God. The
uh,
the myth of masturbation is something that is very weird, like the
mm.
idea that you get blind. But look at the reality
Mm.
of orgasm. Now, I saw this TED
Mm.
talk, and this was by a sort of
Mm.
sex scientist, if you want to call them. I don't know what the actual term is.
Yeah.
She spoke about
Mm.
how there's this woman she encountered who used to get an orgasm every time she brushed her teeth. So there was
Okay.
something in the motion of moving up and down her jaw with a toothbrush
Mm.
that made her
Yeah.
orgasm. And so they found this case, and of course everybody was very intrigued, and they started
Yeah.
following her, they started asking her
Yeah.
questions. Initially they thought this
Mm-hmm.
might be a case of one particular toothpaste doing something remarkable, but later they found out this can work with anything. Any
The workforce.
toothpaste, any
Yeah. Okay.
toothbrush with that particular individual makes her orgasm when she brushes her teeth. And unfortunately,
Okay.
what ended up happening is after a protracted period of time, she got so frustrated by this thing happening to her. She stopped using a toothpaste, she stopped washing, she stopped brushing, and she just shifted to a mouthwash for dental health. But it's just that what it
Okay.
proves is that these two examples, that the myths and realities about sex can be very, very weird.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's even more important to have greater knowledge and greater discussions, so that we can sort of separate the proverbial chaff from the grain, you know in
Mm-hmm.
terms of understanding what is actually true and what is actually possible and what is not
Even
experience.
words like orgasm and vagina and even Viagra, I have heard of in organized setups. Right, you can use a euphemism
Yes.
in like very extreme circumstances, right? And there have been times
Hmm.
where like I've heard someone using euphemism, not realize what they mean is masturbation.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
They're like that damn time,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
you,
Like
I don't.
things
I
like, for
think there's
example,
very little
things.
discourse about especially this thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So euphemisms like self-pleasuring. I mean, what is that supposed to mean?
Ah,
Self-pleasuring.
yeah.
Yeah, it's quite
In fact, you know,
ridiculous.
there's a scene in the Dictator. You've seen the movie, right? The Dictator.
No, I haven't actually.
So,
I've barely
uh,
seen movies, but anyway,
so
yeah.
there's a scene where the dictator he's never masturbated because he just has sex every night with a different person, and he realizes like he discovers masturbation when he can't have sex for a long time, when he's stuck because of funny circumstances in a supermarket as a worker in a supermarket in the U.S.
Hmm.
So it's not about the movie. It's about when I was first watching it. I was watching it with a senior. We were on the train back from an event back to Kolkata, right?
Okay.
And so he skipped it. So he just skipped that part and said, no, 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 I can't see that with you. I'm like,
Hmm.
why? Like,
Hmm.
it was something wrong. So then I went back home and I saw it, and I'm like, actually, this is just masturbation. Like, what's wrong with it?
Hmm. And even like
Right? And that's
masturbation,
the kind of taboo.
yeah, yeah, and masturbation is one aspect. Even things like kissing, right? I mean, just look at the way the censor board in
Huh?
India chops off kissing scenes, and the
Hmm.
trepidation that people feel to watch kissing scenes in front of their parents in like
Hmm.
cinema halls or when a movie is
The
on.
trepidation people feel to kiss. That is
Yes,
the problem. Look at
yes.
UP. You can't kiss in goddamn Lucknow.
Yeah, exactly, man. I mean, it is the most human form of showing affection. And as long as it's consensual, what is the problem? Like, look, I have
Hmm.
my issues with people who do PDA on social media. Okay, like I don't like that whole
Okay.
idea of PDA on social media, but I think if two people want to kiss
Okay.
in a public setup and obviously they are
Huh?
not sort of pissing anybody else off, then they are very much entitled to do
And then
it.
they're not doing it in a boardroom or a meeting or
Yeah, yeah,
like in
of
an
course.
office.
Yeah. And I think what I also find really problematic in all of this is the fact that there is
Hmm.
this insidious ideology in society, and especially in the kind
Hmm.
of India that we see today, where it's much
Yeah.
easier to show your hate in public than to show your love.
Hmm.
Like, if you go to, let's say, the Hindi belt, you're more likely to find scenes of people beating each other or lynching than you are of
Yeah.
people kissing each other. So I think that's
Hmm.
another ideology that's permeated in a malicious way into society. The fact that we can't
Hmm.
show our emotions in public. I don't know if it comes down to this fear of being vulnerable, of people thinking that it's vulnerable if you show
Uh-huh.
affection in public. But clearly, we don't think that way
Hmm.
when it comes to showing hate in public.
Fair, true, true. And I think, oh wait, we didn't discuss like a different tangent to it, like the entire idea of how just because we condition people to not be able to like not express love in the fullest way in which they feel it, there is so much more that goes into that construct when you get into a romantic equation.
Mm-hmm.
The ideas like unrequited love, ideas like just like PDA leads you to the idea that there are times when you just don't confess, you just don't express, and it leads to far worse problems than just not doing the best you can in a romantic equation. It might just lead to you not starting that equation off.
Exactly. And I think that's a very good point you make, because ideology and the different kinds of repressions that are involved in the whole mechanism of one-sided love or unrequited love is something that really fascinates me. And just the way ideology works in the realm of unrequited love. So if I may use the example of Jay Gatsby, who's one of the more popular literary characters in the last couple of centuries. So Gatsby has this woman that he intensely loves called Daisy. And in Daisy, he concentrates his entire pursuit of life. So his quest for riches, for ambition, for this rags to riches story that he experiences, becomes embodied
Mm-hmm.
and typified in the character of Daisy, who herself
Mm-hmm.
represents the American dream. Now, Daisy doesn't really love Gatsby back. She pretends to love him, but she actually loves his wealth and his status. But what Gatsby sort of aspires in the character of Daisy is this larger than life possibility. And I think this is a very good example of how ideology permeates unrequited love. Because in a lot of cases, the person who claims to
Mm-hmm.
be this selfless lover is actually a
Mm-hmm.
narcissist because they have imposed their values or their aspirations upon a person, and now they are trying to hunt down those values and aspirations by trying to hunt down that
Mm-hmm.
person.
Right, true, true. I think that happens a lot, like right up from so just two things that will tell you how how this has permeated just human love forever. No?
Hmm.
Take Ye Dil Hai Mushkil, that film, okay, and I think that there's some line there where
ओ
सबा
यस,
को से
where
इश्क
where
करने के
शाहरुख
लिए
खान
मुझे
says कि ये या कि
या या
सबा से इश्क करने के लिए मुझे सबा की ही जरूरत नहीं.
बाकी कोई बात नहीं है, right? So one
Yes.
is that the entire idea of how you see love as a muse. You don't really need that person around you, or you don't need their physical attributes to be present for you to be imagining what you feel a lover should be, and then project it onto the person, whatever little you know of this real being.
Mm-hmm.
And the fusion of your imagination and what little you know of the reality of this being is good enough for you to live with and assume that you're in love, right? The second thing, which tells you how far back we can go to see unrequited love, or why you don't need reciprocation to be in love, is in the Upanishads, right, where they're saying that no one like loves the husband for the husband's sake, no one loves the wife for the wife's sake, but
Mm-hmm.
for the self that is in the wife. And it says none ever loves anything else except for the self.
Right.
Right, and it's beautiful. It's telling you how you in fact just end up loving a concept, and that concept is top of your own creation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not to say all romantic equations are just like cosmology, right? But that's to go and say that there's a lot you're doing in your head which is not happening, which is contributing to what the romance is all about. So it's not
Yes.
always real.
Mm-hmm. So, see, this is a sort of a creative participation that is happening because
Exactly.
there is a certain
Exactly.
objective reality in which a particular person is
Mm.
grounded, and then
Yeah.
by imposing your love on that person, you're also imposing your own
Mm-hmm.
identity of what you think that person
Mm-hmm.
should be, and so there is a mixture
Mm-hmm.
of what you perceive and what
Mm-hmm.
effectively exists. So I think
Yeah.
that's a fascinating process. But what also
Yeah.
what
And
yeah, yeah, go on.
mhm. No, so just on that same film, right, Edina Mushkil, there's another different tangent to it. The
Mm-hmm.
Ranbir Anushka tangent,
Oh
So even
yes.
that is unrequited love from Ranbir towards Anushka.
Mm-hmm.
So decisively showing you that you don't need the other person to love you back for you to even madly be in love,
Mm-hmm. But don't you
right? And
think?
so
Yeah, yeah. Go on.
yeah, so that leads me with one conclusion, right? That if you love someone just expecting them to love you back, where does that leave a mother-son equation, or where does that leave selfless love to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're expecting something back, it's a lot more like to me, it's more like shopkeeping than like because you want something back. It's more of trading than it is like love in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it means, like we discussed in the past, that it's just you and your selflessness and your promise of transcendence, that definition was excluding in itself the idea of someone having to do something from their end. So without making it toxic, if you can, in any case, if you don't have to bank on the other person doing something for you in return, I think that itself is also love. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, it's in most cases a much higher form of love.
But sort of getting back to the Ranbir Anushka point that you make, and I
Yeah.
think when I watched the film, and I personally think it's a great film. I know some people might disagree. I mean, it's a sentimental film, yes, but it's a good film.
Yeah. Oh,
And
it's a beautiful film. Yeah.
yeah, and one thing I
Uh-huh.
found really interesting is that Ranbir throughout the film clamors for a certain kind of love from Anushka's character, where he
Yeah.
wants to be the traditional romantic lover, whereas Anushka says that
Mm.
look, I love you, but I love you only in the capacity of a friend. So in
Mm.
the absence of the sexual dynamic, like obviously Anushka does not mean to include that sexual dynamic. It's not a friends with benefits relationship. But if you take sex and lust out of the equation, what do you think is the difference between the kind of love that Ranbir pines for and the kind of love that Anushka is able to provide Ranbir? Like what exactly makes that friendly love and attachment different from that romantic pursuit?
I don't. I just think it's a difference of the love having been expressed. I don't think there is a very tangible difference in their kind of love. It's a lot like the yummy and yum example we discussed in the Rig Veda now.
Okay.
I think primarily you can't differentiate in terms of the love. You can differentiate it just in terms of the circumstances the two of them are in. What was that yummy yum concept? They're growing up together. Both of them are just sharing the same experiences. One person interprets their same shared experiences as romance. One person interprets them just as good experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's more a function of how you've grown up being taught and thinking what romance leads to. Is me staring at someone who's from a gender which I find sexually appealing. Does that necessarily mean it is a romantic indication, or does that just mean we are part of a good day and like this is good memories we are creating with the other person? Now in Ranveer's head, I think that ended up meaning, and this is true for so many people out there. In Ranveer's head, the same like smiles and the same like drinking and partying they did ended up meaning, she's going to fall in love with me because I'm falling in love with her, and this is the romance. Like this is the love I need to sustain. And in her head, it was just one of the very good things which she needs to sustain. The difference comes about in terms of how you've been conditioned to define romance in your head.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like they were in different rooms. They were in the same room, but they just interpreted the room differently.
Yes, and sort of interpreted the intimacy differently as well.
Exactly.
Yes, and I think one interesting way to filter this is something you ironically told me quite some time ago. I think it was
Mm.
2 years ago when we were discussing what it really means to be in love, and you said that look, if the person is irreplaceable, then it means you are in
Yeah.
love with them. So I think if you put that definition to a test in Aidil Mushkil, then Anushka would have been
Yeah.
irreplaceable for Ranbir, but not the other way around.
Mm.
So
Oh,
maybe yeah.
I think when you're discussing love, that is the core, and that is the one thing which is universally true. I'll tell you why.
Hmm.
Because I still think that I'm a bit old school there in the idea that love will conquer everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying keep pursuing someone who spurned you and keep irritating them.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is if something's not working out right, and if you're cynical about the statement that it's going to work out at the end, it's probably because you don't love that thing or that individual as much as you love stability. For example, if you have to focus on academics, and if you think, or if you're focusing on your job and you think loving someone or pursuing this romantic interest is going to take too much of your time or is too much of a burden on you, then perhaps you love stability or the construct society has fed you on. Oh, you need to do this, then you need to do that far more than you love that individual.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think if you're going to pursue that individual, it's gonna turn out well. And why I feel that is because I think that one thing is then irreplaceable for you. There's a second side to that. It doesn't mean they are like that. There's something which you can't sustain without. You can sustain at a lower level of like life emotional equilibrium perhaps without them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one thing which you will not get. Like there's no one who can be as good as them.
Yeah, it completes you,
And
so
if
to
you
speak.
found someone like that, you're in love with them. That is romantic love.
Yes, and
Like everything else is
Mhm.
just a strong liking.
Yes, great. And I think that's a much more accessible definition of love, if I may put it that way, because
Mhm.
we started this
Yeah.
discussion in the previous episode talking about how love is transcendental. But I think at a
Mm.
regular level, and even I was sort of getting some comments from some of our friends, and they were saying that look, we don't
Yeah.
understand what it means when you say love is transcendental because, well, we can't really measure it,
Oh.
right? At what level does love
Uh-huh.
transcend? But I think this is
Huh?
much easier in terms of the fact that if you say
Mm.
that love is about irreplaceability, then it's very
Mm.
simple to ask yourself, okay, can I do without this person? And I think even if you don't get
Mm.
an immediate answer, in the long term, you
Huh?
will eventually get to answer that question and therefore understand
Mm.
whether you really are in love with the person or not.
The idea that love is essentially, as we just discussed, no, within you, you're projecting your ideas and what you think of romance and what you've been fed by society and life onto the other person, and it's just your feeling of doing well.
Hmm.
So, right from dopamine, which is going to give you confidence or make you feel good about the day, and you're going to approach the day with a stride,
Hmm.
to right up to you being more emotionally like actually emotionally better off, or actually having proper emotional advice from the other who is getting to know you and a third party perspective on you, everything which you are as a person.
Hmm.
Love transcends you because of what you feel and like how and the way you react to love.
Hmm.
So it's literally just you helping yourself. Right? It's like when Newton discovered gravity, the apple is not gravity. the apple is a sign, is a signal to him, which is it's telling him to combine a lot of links in his head where he starts thinking, okay, so everything falls, and why does it fall?
Mm-hmm.
So love is just your way of you getting introduced to things and changes you can make, and it's a very pleasant way to do it. I'm not saying it transcends you immediately like, say, money would or like position would in society.
Yeah.
But yes, it's far more permanent and it's far more helpful.
Right. So I think a good way to wrap this up would be to say that irreplaceability is the determinant of love. That is how you come to determine whether you are in love or not. And love in
Yep.
turn is the vehicle that leads to transcendence. So if you are sort of aspiring for a more
Mm.
spiritual understanding of yourself and of the world around
Huh?
you, then a good way to do
Mm.
that is through love once you have
Mm.
determined that it is love because you find
Huh?
it irreplaceable.
Yeah, and I think a very important part of that is to be able to talk about it. Like there's a lot of
Hmm.
awkwardness present in people in terms of what should be said and what shouldn't be said in a
Yeah.
conversation, or what should, how quickly do you move when talking to people or expressing or confessing to them, right? Right from like I think you need to like kudos to the American culture there, right? Not to stereotype them,
Hmm.
but the idea of how you need to be quicker in terms of expressing yourself or
Hmm.
not wasting time with an elephant in the room is very important. You don't want to have 6 months with a person, tell them I love you for the first time, having felt it, of course, for the last 6 months, knowing fully well you should have said it some 4 5 months ago,
Hmm.
and then suddenly and then realize that you don't know this person as well as you should know someone who you share a 6 month equation with. So when you haven't declared that feeling, you can't get to know the person better. You can't discuss weaknesses, right? So in someone who you're pursuing and in the first stage of wooing and courtship, you'll notice no one ever is going to talk about their weakness or like your partner's weakness or your own
Hmm.
weakness,
Yes.
which is a significant hindrance to two people getting to know each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you're also saying is don't romanticize and glorify that awkwardness which comes into play
Yeah,
when you're not distinctly labeling a relationship
exactly.
or labeling your intentions in a
Exactly.
relationship.
Yeah, yeah. The
Yes.
sweet nothings of what is left unsaid is a great thing, which and like it's
Hmm.
good for like the first 2 3 dates are good for poetry. But if the sweet nothings go into 6 months of sweet nothings, that's really like destructive to a person.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the larger point of what we have been discussing over the last couple of episodes, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
to liberate conversation around love, liberate conversation around
exactly.
sex and everything that entails both of these
Mm-hmm.
ideas. Because in the
Mm-hmm.
absence of that, you are conditioning yourself to not express who you really
Mm-hmm.
are, because the way you love, the way you think about sex
Mm-hmm.
make a fundamental
Mm-hmm.
aspect of your personality. So it's important to get it out there, speak to people, see what your
Exactly.
ideas echo and where they differ, and
Mm-hmm.
create a dialogue about it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And know that there are some things which are universal about love, but
Hmm.
most things will be subjective. That you and your view and both of you in that one situation, right? And it's bound to be subjective as long
Hmm.
as you recognize there are a few universal things. Like I really think the idea of irreplaceability or
Yes.
transcendence.
Hmm. Absolutely. Great. So I think on that note, we'll call it a day, and next week we'll
Yeah.
move on to some other discussion. I don't know if it'll be about something as personal as this, but
Huh?
we'll try and keep
Oh, no,
it
this is not
in.
personal. Like, oh, okay, for the record, this is not personal. Huh? This is just observations we have on
Yeah,
other
yeah, of
people.
course. I mean, but personal in the sense that it's something we hold close to our hearts, quite literally.
Of course. Huh. Chalo, chalo.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hi, guys. Thanks for listening to this episode of That's What We Said. This completes our discussion on love. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any experiences that you would like to share with us from your life that either reflect or contradict what Ved and I said, please do so in the comment section. Press the bell icon to subscribe and get updates on our latest podcasts. We will be back exploring more issues that matter to all of us. Till then, take care.